the sweltering summer of 1854, as cholera swept through the cotton fields of a remote Georgia plantation like a silent reaper, a young enslaved man named Elias Crow knelt by a muddy creek, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he knew. Bodies were dropping, workers collapsing in the rows, their skin ashen, their cries muffled by the endless hum of insects. The overseer barked orders, blaming lazy bones and cursed water. But Elias saw the truth in the stagnant pools, the filth carried from the privies upstream. That night, under a moon veiled by Spanish moss, he fashioned something from scavenged wire, charcoal scraps, and river sand, a simple device that would filter the poison from the water. By dawn, the first group who drank from it survived the fever. Word spread like wildfire through the cabins, a fragile hope amid the despair. But hope, in those shadowed times, was a dangerous thing. Elias's ingenuity didn't just save lives, it marked him for a fate far crueler than the disease itself. Before we continue, subscribe and turn on the notifications. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. The plantation sprawled across the red clay hills of middle Georgia, a kingdom of white-columned mansions and endless fields where the air hung heavy with the scent of blooming cotton and unspoken suffering. It was owned by the Hargrove family, old money rooted deep in the soil, like the gnarled oaks that lined the drive. Jeremiah Hargrove, the patriarch, was a man of stern piety, his Bible thumping louder than his whip, yet his ledgers whispered of efficiencies born from brutality. Enslaved laborers, hundreds of them, men, women, and children, tended the crops from sunup to sundown, their backs bent under the sun, their spirits chained by more than iron. The Hargroves prided themselves on progressive methods, importing doctors from Charleston to tend to the stock, but progress in that era meant little more than sustaining productivity. Cholera arrived unannounced that year, a spectre fed by the contaminated wells shared by all. The master's pristine spring separate, of course, from the troughs filled from the same tainted creek. Elias Crow was no ordinary field hand. Born in the shadows of those same fields around 1830, he had been torn from his mother's arms at age 10, sold to settle a family debt up north before being returned like damaged goods. Whispers among the elders spoke of his father, a skilled artisan from Virginia, who had taught him the rudiments of mechanics before vanishing into the night, likely punished for some unspoken defiance. Elias inherited that spark, a quiet genius honed in stolen moments. He mended tools in the barn by lantern light, rigging pulleys that eased the cotton gin's relentless grind, or diverting rainwater to irrigate parched patches without drawing the overseer's eye. But genius in bondage was a double-edged blade. It made one indispensable yet perilously visible. The outbreak began subtly. A few coughs in the women's quarters, then fevered delirium that claimed 3 souls in a single week. The community of the enslaved gathered in hushed tones after dark, sharing herbal remedies passed down through generations. Sassafras tea, willow bark poultices, but nothing stemmed the tide. Elias watched his closest kin, his Aunt Mira, waste away, her body racked by cramps from the foul water they were forced to drink. "It's the creek," he murmured to the others one evening as they huddled around a smouldering fire pit. "The waste flows down from the big house privies, straight into what we pull for the troughs. We boil what we can, but it ain't enough." Boiling required time they didn't have, fuel that was rationed, and overseers who patrolled with dogs at heel. Driven by that desperate clarity, Elias worked in secrecy. He foraged bits of fine mesh from discarded sieves, layered crushed charcoal from the blacksmith's forge, known for its purifying smoke, and topped it with clean sand sifted from the riverbed. The contraption was crude, a barrel halved and inverted, bound with twine, suspended over a larger tub. Water poured through the layers emerged clearer, tasting of earth rather than decay. He tested it first on himself, then on Mira's surviving daughter, little Josie, whose eyes brightened by morning. Skepticism lingered. Old-timers called it fool's hope, but as the device multiplied, hidden in the underbrush or buried under floorboards, survival rates shifted. By mid-July, the fields echoed with cautious relief. The cholera's grip loosened in the cabins, while rumors swirled that the master's own well had begun to sour. Jeremiah Hargrove noticed the change, of course. His records, meticulously kept in a leather-bound journal, tallied losses, down from a dozen a week to mere whispers. At first, he attributed it to divine favor, preaching sermons on providence from his veranda. But curiosity gnawed. He summoned the overseer, a wiry man named Tate with a scar across his lip from some long-forgotten brawl. "What's this talk of filtered water?" Hargrove demanded, his voice low as they paced the porch. Tate shrugged, but his eyes darted. "Nothing but superstition, sir. The darkies got their ways." Yet Hargrove, ever the businessman, sensed opportunity. In an age when yellow fever and cholera ravaged ports from New Orleans to Savannah, a reliable safeguard could mean fortunes. He began inquiries, subtle at first, questioning house servants, doubling patrols at dusk. Elias felt the noose tightening. He had shared the design with a trusted circle, old Ben, the carpenter who built frames from scrap wood, Lena, the cook, who diverted kitchen ashes for more charcoal. They called it the Creek Guardian in their private tongues, a talisman against the invisible killer. But visibility bred danger. One evening, as Elias adjusted a hidden filter near the horse trough, Tate's shadow fell long across the ground. "What you got there, boy?" the overseer growled, his boot kicking at the barrel. Elias's heart pounded, but he feigned ignorance, mumbling about mending a leak. Tate's laugh was cold. "Clever one, ain't you? The massa might like a look." Word reached Harvard before the year was out, or so the fragments of history suggest. Hargrove, connected through cotton brokers to northern academics, boasted of the plantation miracle in letters that circulated among elite circles. A professor of chemistry, Dr. Elias Hawthorne, no relation to the author but a man of similar shadowy ambitions, visited under guise of a buying trip. He sketched the device in his notebook, praising its ingenuity, while Hargrove nodded, crediting his own oversight. Elias was paraded before the visitor like a curiosity, forced to demonstrate, his hands steady despite the humiliation. "A natural talent," Hawthorne noted, but in his correspondence back to Cambridge, the enslaved man's name vanished, replaced by vague allusions to Southern resourcefulness. The theft was methodical, masked in the era's paternalistic veil. Patents filed in 1855 bore Hargrove's name, the filter refined and scaled for urban use, sold to municipalities reeling from epidemics. Elias received no coin, no recognition, instead a transfer to deeper fields, away from the creek, his movements watched. Whispers of resentment grew among the enslaved. Tales of his mother's old songs twisted into warnings. What rises from the water can drag you under. Yet the device worked its quiet revolution. Cholera outbreaks waning in the quarters while the masters profited, their ledgers blooming. Decades later, in the dusty attics of Southern archives, a forgotten patent file surfaced, yellowed and annotated in Hawthorne's hand. It spoke of innovations derived from labor, but the true originator, erased like so many voices before. Elias Crow faded into the rolls of the dead, his genius a ghost in the machine of history. But echoes persist, in oral histories collected by descendants in the 1930s, in a rusted relic unearthed from a Georgia farmstead in 2023. How does one steal not just an invention, but a man's legacy? The answer lies buried in the silences of those fields, waiting for the light. As the summer heat clung to the Georgia lowlands like a fever dream, the filtered water became a clandestine lifeline in the shadowed world of the Hargrove plantation. Elias Crow moved through his days with a vigilance born of survival, his eyes scanning the horizon for the overseer's silhouette against the cotton bolls. The device he had birthed from desperation, simple layers of sand, charcoal and mesh, spread through the quarters like a whispered prayer, passed hand to hand under the cover of night. Families who once buried their young in unmarked graves now watched children play without the pallor of impending death. Old Ben, the carpenter with hands gnarled like ancient roots, crafted hidden housings from discarded crates, embedding the filters in rain barrels or along the creek's bend where patrols were thin. Lena, in the big house kitchen, slipped extra ash from the hearths, her face a mask of quiet defiance as she ground it fine for the purifying layers. But salvation carried its own shadows. Elias felt the weight of eyes upon him, not just from Tate's predatory gaze, but from within the community itself. Some whispered gratitude in the dim light of the praise houses, their songs laced with coded thanks. The clear stream rises, washes the weary, while others eyed him with suspicion. Innovation in chains was a beacon, drawing unwanted light. "You done made us a target, boy," murmured Josiah, a field hand whose brother had perished early in the outbreak. Elias nodded, the sting of truth in his chest. He had lost Mira to the cholera's cruel grasp just weeks before, her final breaths a rattle that echoed in his dreams. Holding little Josie through her recovery had been his anchor, the girl's small hand in his. A reminder that genius, however stolen from the stars, could defy the grave, yet each filter he tended was a risk, a thread in a web that could ensnare them all. Jeremiah Hargrove's interest deepened like a gathering storm. From his study, overlooking the fields where laborers moved in rhythmic exhaustion, he pored over his ledgers by candlelight. The numbers told a tale of improbable mercy. Mortality rates plummeted in the quarters, while the crop yields held steady, even climbed. No sermons to the Almighty could fully mask the anomaly. He summoned Tate more frequently now, their conversations laced with the sharp tang of bourbon on the veranda. "These folk ain't dying like they should," Hargrove mused one evening, his fingers drumming the rail as fireflies danced below. Tate, ever the loyal hound, reported fragments, talk of clearing the mud, of Elias's nocturnal wanderings by the creek. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, a flicker of calculation crossing his pious features. He had built his empire on the backs of the bound, but empires demanded adaptation. In letters to his Charleston contacts, he alluded to a novel safeguard against the summer plagues, careful not to reveal too much, lest competitors sniff the wind. The professor's arrival in late August marked the turning point, an intrusion from the north that rippled through the plantation like a stone in still water. Dr. Elias Hawthorne stepped from his carriage in a cloud of dust, his spectacles glinting under the relentless sun, his valise heavy with notebooks and vials. Officially, he was there to inspect cotton strains for a Boston textile firm, but his true quarry was the rumor of resilience amid ruin. Hargrove hosted him lavishly, venison suppers, tours of the gin house, while steering conversations toward the cholera's retreat. "A miracle of management," Hargrove claimed, crediting prayer and firm discipline. Hawthorne, a man whose lectures on public health filled Harvard's halls, pressed gently, his questions probing like a surgeon's probe. Whispers from house servants, bought with a silver coin or two, led him to the stables, where he caught sight of a peculiar setup. A trough fed by a makeshift cascade, water emerging pristine from what looked like layered refuse. Elias was summoned that afternoon, his shirt sweat-soaked from the fields, to demonstrate before the two men. The air in the barn hung thick with the scent of hay and horse, tension coiling like a whip. "Show the gentleman your trick, Crow," Hargrove ordered, his tone paternal yet edged with possession. Elias's hands, calloused and steady, poured the murky creek water through the device, the liquid transforming before their eyes, sediment trapped, the deadly taint subdued. Hawthorne leaned in, sketching furiously, murmuring about gravitational filtration and adsorptive media. He praised the elegance, the accessibility, blind to, or willfully ignoring, the hands that had forged it from scraps denied to free men. To Elias, it was humiliation etched in every word, his creation, born of loss and ingenuity, reduced to a curiosity for learned eyes. "Where did you learn such craft?" Hawthorne asked almost kindly. Elias met his gaze briefly, voice low. "From the land, sir, and from watching what kills slow." Hargrove chuckled, clapping Elias on the shoulder as if to a favoured hound. "Clever stock we have here." That night, as Hawthorne retired to the guest quarters, Elias slipped away to the creek, dismantling a filter with trembling fingers. The professor's visit wasn't mere happenstance. Hargrove's connections ran north like the Mississippi, through brokers who traded not just cotton, but ideas. In the days that followed, Hawthorne lingered observing, refining the design with Hargrove's reluctant aid, replacing twine with wire, scaling it for broader use. Elias was kept close, his labor conscripted under the guise of assistance, his every move chronicled. Resentment simmered in the quarters, songs turned mournful, warning of gifts turned to chains. Little Josie clung to him more tightly, her innocent questions piercing. "Why they take your clear water, Uncle Eli?" He had no answer, only the hollow ache of watching his salvation morph into someone else's fortune. By September's end, as the cholera faded with the cooling winds, Hawthorne departed with blueprints tucked away, his farewell letter to Hargrove promising collaborations in Cambridge. The patent process began quietly, Hargrove's name affixed as inventor, the enslaved architect erased like a footnote. Elias was reassigned to the remotest fields, his genius now a liability, patrolled by Tate's unyielding watch. Yet in the silences between shifts, he taught others the layer's secret, embedding knowledge in memory rather than metal. Decades would pass before fragments resurfaced. A 1930s WPA interview with Josie, now elderly, recounting her uncle's creek magic to wide-eyed interviewers. A 2024 dig, unearthing a corroded relic from the old creek bed, its design echoing patents long attributed to others. The theft wasn't just of wire and sand. It was the silencing of a voice that dared to purify an impurity. In those red clay hills where history's erasures run deep, Elias Crow's story lingers, a testament to ingenuity stolen and resilience unspoken. As the autumn leaves turned brittle underfoot in the Hargrove fields, Elias Crow found himself adrift in a new kind of isolation. His days stretched thin across the farthest acres, where the cotton rows thinned into wild brambles. The reassignment had come swiftly after Hawthorne's departure, a silent decree from the big house that placed him under the watchful eye of lesser overseers, men too dull for the central operations but keen enough for cruelty. No longer near the creek, his hands were now bound to the plough, turning red earth that clung like blood to his skin. The filters he had once tended were dismantled or hidden deeper, their existence a fragile secret guarded by those who remembered Mira's fevered end and the miracle that followed. Little Josie, now thriving with cheeks flushed by health rather than hollowed by sickness, was sent to the women's quarters farther in, her questions about the clear water met with shushed warnings. Elias caught glimpses of her during rare gatherings, her small frame weaving through the crowd like a reminder of what he had wrought and what it cost. In the quarters, the mood shifted from cautious triumph to a brooding undercurrent of loss. The cholera had receded, leaving behind graves that dotted the hillside like forgotten stones, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that the masters now held the reins of survival itself. Old Ben confided in Elias during a stolen moment by the smokehouse, his voice a gravelly whisper amid the sizzle of salted pork. "They took your light, boy, and twisted it for their lanterns. But the dark remembers." Ben had seen similar shadows in his 60 years, tools invented in desperation, claimed as oversight by those who wielded the lash. Lena, too, carried the burden. Her kitchen duties a veil for smuggling messages. A nod here, a scrap of cloth knotted in code there, ensuring the filters persisted in the outer cabins. Yet fear coiled tighter, Tate's patrols intensified, his scar twisting with each report of unnatural clearings in the troughs. Whispers spread of punishments for the curious, solitary confinements in the barn's dim undercroft, where the air grew thick with unspoken regrets. Jeremiah Hargrove, meanwhile, savoured the fruits of appropriated ingenuity from the sanctity of his study. Letters from the north arrived like clockwork, Hawthorne's script elegant and effusive, detailing refinements to the filter, brass fittings for durability, mathematical models for flow rates. Hargrove replied with guarded enthusiasm, enclosing sketches procured under duress from the enslaved workshops. He envisioned not just plantation safeguards, but a commodity for the wider world. Cities choked by their own waste, ports where epidemics felled merchants as readily as labourers. In a missive dated October 1854, he confided to a Savannah broker, "Our methods yield purity from peril, a boon for the age." The word "our" was a deliberate erasure, wrapping Elias's creation in the cloak of Hargrove enterprise. Profits trickled in by spring. Orders for prototype units shipped north, disguised as agricultural aids, while the plantation's ledgers swelled, funding expansions that pressed the enslaved harder into the soil. Elias's genius, once a spark in the darkness, now flickered in isolation. Nights brought dreams of the creek's murmur, of layers sifting life from death, but waking revealed only the endless furrow. He adapted quietly, rigging subtle improvements in the fields, a notched hoe that eased soil without alerting the overseers, or a rainwater diverter for parched crops that echoed his lost design. These small acts were his defiance, threads of knowledge woven into the community's fabric. Josiah, once skeptical, now sought him out, his brother's grave a fresh wound that softened his doubt. "You gave us breath when the water choked," he admitted one dusk, as they mended fences under the fading light. "But what of your own?" Elias had no words for the ache, only the steady rhythm of hammer on nail, building resilience where patents could not reach. The theft rippled outward, masked by the era's silences. By 1856, Harvard's laboratories buzzed with iterations of the device. Hawthorne lecturing on sanitary engineering to rapt students, crediting Southern collaborators without names. Patents under Hargrove's imprimatur spread the filter to New Orleans' fever wards and Boston's tenements, saving lives in anonymity while Elias toiled unseen. The enslaved community preserved the truth in oral tapestries, songs at the praise house that layered meanings like sand and charcoal, tales of the Creek Whisperer passed to children born free in distant futures. Yet official records bent the narrative. Hargrove's journal spoke of inspired management, Hawthorne's papers of indigenous adaptations, the enslaved voice omitted like a smudged entry. Decades folded upon themselves, the plantation's grandeur fading into weathered ruins as the Civil War's echoes scarred the land. Elias vanished from the rolls around 1862, perhaps fleeing in the chaos of emancipation's first tremors, or claimed by a mystery fever that overseers noted curtly. His kin scattered, Josie to Atlanta's rebuilding streets, where she raised a family on stories of Uncle's water wisdom. The Invention, rebranded as the Hargrove-Hawthorne Purifier, became a footnote in public health tomes, its origins buried under layers of academic prestige. Communities near the old fields fell silent, the trauma of bondage sealing lips against the past. while elites toasted progress built on unacknowledged backs. It wasn't until the 1930s, amid the Works Progress Administration's oral history drives, that fragments resurfaced. Josie's granddaughter, interviewed in a modest Georgia home, recounted the stolen stream with eyes fierce against forgetting. He made clean what they dirtied, and they took it like everything else. Archivists noted the tale, filing it among folklore, but the weight lingered. In 2023, a routine survey of the Old Creek bed yielded a relic: corroded barrel shards layered with charcoal residue, carbon dated to the 1850s. Experts at a Savannah university puzzled over it, cross-referencing patents that rang false. Whispers of plagiarism stirred academic circles. Descendants of Hargrove, descendants uneasy in their inherited silence. The story of Elias Crow endures not in bronze plaques or scholarly tomes, but in the persistent flow of truth against erasure. In those red clay hollows, where cholera's ghosts still murmur, his filter reminds us, innovation born of suffering cannot be fully stolen, only delayed in its revelation. The waters run clear, eventually carrying secrets to the sea. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are hearing this story. I want to know how far these silenced reports reach. Winter's chill settled over the Hargrove plantation like a shroud, frosting the cotton stalks into brittle skeletons that cracked underfoot in the early mornings. Elias Crow rose before dawn, his breath visible in the dim light of the remote cabin he now shared with a rotating crew of field hands, men whose faces blurred into a collective weariness, their conversations sparse and edged with caution. The reassignment had severed him from the heart of the community, placing him on the plantation's ragged fringes where the soil turned poorer, the overseers more brutish. No longer could he slip to the creek under pretense of mending. Instead, he hauled logs for fences or cleared underbrush, his mind adrift on the what-ifs of his stolen creation. The filters, those humble guardians of life, persisted in whispers, tended by Ben and Lena in the core quarters, but Elias felt their absence like a limb severed, a constant throb, reminding him of the fragility of hope in chains. The community bore the scars of the cholera's retreat, but the true wound festered from the appropriation. In the praise houses, where gatherings masked as spiritual solace, songs evolved into laments, their rhythms laced with veiled accusations. The stream we cleared for our own now flows to the Master's throne, one elder intoned during a hushed ring shout, the circle's sway a mimicry of water's flow. Little Josie, growing into a girl of sharp eyes and quicker questions, carried Elias's lessons like hidden embers. She mimicked the layering in games with the younger ones, scooping sand from the yard and piling it in secret mounds, only to scatter it at the sound of approaching boots. Her mother, Mira's sister, watched with a mix of pride and terror, knowing that echoes of innovation could summon the lash as surely as rebellion. "Keep it in the heart, child," she urged, her voice a threadbare veil over the grief that never fully lifted. Families, once knit by shared survival, now navigated a landscape of suspicion, where gratitude warred with the fear that one man's light had dimmed them all. Jeremiah Hargrove, insulated in his warming study by fires of imported oak, orchestrated the expansion of his windfall with the precision of a conductor. Correspondence with Hawthorne flowed steadily, each letter a blueprint for betrayal. The professor, ensconced in Cambridge's ivy-clad halls, experimented relentlessly, testing alloys for casings, calculating percolation rates under gaslight. "Your southern ingenuity proves invaluable," he wrote in November 1854, enclosing a draft patent application that bore Hargrove's name alone, the enslaved origins reduced to a marginal note, adapted from local practices. Hargrove amended it swiftly, striking even that faint trace, and forwarded it to Washington with affidavits from compliant witnesses, overseers like Tate, who swore to the proprietor's oversight. The application described the device as a novel apparatus for water clarification, crediting Hargrove's visionary implementation on his estate. No mention of the creek's poison, the fevered nights, or the hands that had first sifted purity from peril. By early 1855, as the Patent Office's wheels turned, Hargrove's ambitions swelled. He partnered with a New Orleans firm, shipping initial units disguised as irrigation tools, barrels fitted with the layered core, sold to planters grappling with their own outbreaks. Profits arrived in crisp bank drafts, funding a new wing to the big house and bonuses for loyal hands like Tate, who patrolled with renewed vigor, his scar a perpetual sneer. Elias heard fragments through the grapevine, a house servant's slip during a rare visit, tales of master's water miracle fetching gold in the markets. It twisted like a knife, his desperation-forged safeguard, meant to shield the vulnerable, now lined the pockets of those who had perpetuated the filth. In quiet moments, as he notched a plough blade to till deeper without strain, Elias pondered escape. Roots whispered along the underground paths that snaked north. But chains of duty held him. Josie, the quarters, the elders who still sought his counsel in stolen glances. Abandoning them felt like another theft, this one self-inflicted. The human toll deepened in subtle fractures. Josiah, once a skeptic, became Elias's unlikely ally, sharing shifts on the fringes where overseers' eyes wandered. They spoke in low tones of the old outbreak, how the cholera had claimed not just bodies, but trusts, families sundered, songs silenced. "You gave us a shield, and they turned it to a sword," Josiah reflected one foggy morning as they felled a dying oak. Elias nodded, the weight of unspoken loss pressing. His own kin, scattered by sales and deaths, haunted him. The filter had been for Mira, for the aunt whose final plea had been for clean water to ease her thirst. Now that legacy circulated in elite journals, Hawthorne's lectures at Harvard drawing applause for practical philanthropy, while the true philanthropists toiled in obscurity. Betrayal extended beyond Hargrove. Complicit were the brokers who ferried designs north, the lawyers who filed claims without query, the society that profited from erased labor. As spring thawed the ground in 1855, the patent granted, Hargrove's device gained traction. Cities like Charleston adopted scaled versions for public fountains, cholera's grip loosening in wards where the poor once perished en masse. Elias learned of it piecemeal, a peddler's boast overheard at market day, a newspaper clipping smuggled by Lena. Hargrove Purifier, a southern salvation. Irony burned. His genius, born of the quarter's despair, sanitized the very systems that sustained bondage. In response, Elias embedded subtler resistances, teaching plough hands to layer soil for better drainage, mimicking the filter's principle to ease field floods without drawing notice. These acts were seeds of persistence, sown in the soil that had witnessed so much erasure. The silences of the era compounded the theft. Official records, plantation logs, medical reports attributed survival to improved sanitation under Hargrove's direction, omitting the creek's truth. Communities nearby, bound by similar yokes, shared rumors in coded dialects, but fear sealed broader outcries. Tate's enforcements grew harsher. A filter discovered in a distant cabin led to public correction. The offender's cries a warning that echoed through the nights. Elias evaded direct scrutiny, his isolation a twisted mercy, but the overseer's gaze lingered, a promise of reckoning. Years blurred into the haze of routine, the invention's shadow lengthening. Elias endured, his spirit a quiet forge, until emancipation's distant thunder in 1865 offered fractured freedom. He slipped away then, tracing paths to Atlanta, where Josie later found him, aged but unbowed, sharing stories with freed kin. The Hargrove legacy crumbled post-war, the big house a relic of faded glory. patents lapsing into public domain. Yet the erasure persisted. Hawthorne's obituaries in 1887 hailed him as a pioneer, Hargrove's descendants inheriting untainted fortunes. It took the 20th century's reckonings to stir the depths. WPA narratives from the 1930s captured echoes, Josie's kin recounting the Creek Man's gift, dismissed as legend by some collectors. In 2024, a Georgia Historical Society's digitization unearthed Hawthorne's private journals, annotations revealing derivation from an unnamed laborer, cross-referenced with oral accounts. Descendants, piecing fragments, confronted the theft in quiet vigils at the old fields, where the creek still runs, its waters a testament to delayed justice. Elias Crow's filter, stolen but not extinguished, flows through history's undercurrents, purifying the narrative one revelation at a time. In the melancholia of those hills, where forgetting wars with memory, his story persists, a genius unbound, washing away the lies. As the relentless cycle of seasons etched deeper lines into the faces of the Hargrove plantation's laborers, Elias Crow navigated his exile on the fringes with the quiet determination of a man who had already lost everything worth stealing. The year 1855 unfolded in a haze of dust and drudgery, the patents granting a distant echo that reached him only through the fragmented tales carried by wandering peddlers or the occasional house servant bold enough to venture out. His days blurred into a rhythm of hauling timber and mending irrigation ditches, far from the creek that had birthed his ingenuity. The water there, once a canvas for his salvation, now mocked him with its unchanged murkiness, a reminder that purity could be claimed but not possessed. Elias's hands, once deft with layers of sand and charcoal, now gripped the plough's handle until his palms blistered, each furrow a silent testament to endurance amid erasure. In the core quarters, the filters endured as clandestine heirlooms, their designs whispered from elder to youth like sacred rites. Old Ben, his frame stooped further by the weight of years, reinforced them with salvaged wire, embedding them in the walls of smokehouses or beneath floorboards where the damp earth preserved their secrecy. Lena's role evolved into that of a guardian, her kitchen a hub for distributing refined charcoal, ground finer now, mimicking the northern refinements she overheard from Hargrove's boastful dinners. The community, scarred by the cholera's harvest of lives, clung to these artifacts with a fervor born of collective memory. Mira's passing lingered in their songs, her name woven into choruses that praised the hidden sieve which had spared the young and frail. Yet gratitude was laced with mourning. The devices spread beyond the plantation into the hands of profiteers felt like a betrayal of its origins. A tool forged in suffering, now polishing the ledgers of indifference. Josiah became Elias's bridge to the heart of the quarters, slipping away during moonless nights to relay news and necessities. Their meetings, huddled in the shadow of a crumbling fence line, were fraught with the rustle of wind through the brambles. Each word a risk measured against the overseer's lanterns bobbing in the distance. "The master's selling your clear into the city folk," Josiah reported one such evening in late spring, his voice a low rumble as he passed a bundle of ash-wrapped cloth. "They say it's saving lives in them fever towns, but the coin goes to building more chains here." Elias absorbed the words without flinching, though they stirred a hollow ache. He had envisioned the filter as a shield for the vulnerable, the children like Josie, whose laughter now pierced the fields, a rare melody amid the grind. Instead, it fortified the very structures of subjugation, scaled for urban elites while the quarters' troughs remained tainted, rationed to sustain labor rather than life. The human fractures widened under this ironic legacy. Families once united by the outbreak's terror now grappled with divided loyalties. Some viewed Elias as an unwitting catalyst for harsher scrutiny, patrols doubling after rumors of contraband purifiers surfaced. Tate, emboldened by his cut of the profits, meted out corrections with calculated severity. A field hand caught diverting creek water-faced isolation in the barn, emerging days later with a gaze dulled by the dark. Whispers of resentment flickered. His gift brought the wolves closer, one woman murmured during a wash-day huddle, her eyes darting to the big house's silhouette. Elias heard echoes of it through Josiah, the isolation gnawing deeper than physical toil. He confided in no one, the nights when doubt clawed at him, dreams replaying Hawthorne's detached scrutiny, the professor's pen scratching away his agency like sediment in a stream. Genius, he realized, was a curse in bondage, a light that illuminated the chains rather than breaking them. Jeremiah Hargrove, from his vantage of expanding wealth, orchestrated the dissemination with a merchant's zeal. His study overflowed with correspondence, orders from Memphis planters, inquiries from Philadelphia sanitarians, even a tentative alliance with federal engineers eyeing river purification for trade routes. The Hargrove Purifier, as it was branded in pamphlets adorned with engravings of pristine fountains, became a symbol of Southern innovation, its crude origins laundered through Hawthorne's academic polish. The professor's letters brimmed with enthusiasm, detailing trials in Boston's overcrowded districts where the device stemmed a minor outbreak, crediting collaborative foresight without a nod to the fields where it was born. Hargrove replied with shipments and schematics, his pious facade cracking under ambition. Sermons from the veranda now intertwined providence with profit, urging the enslaved to toil in gratitude for such mercies. Yet mercy was selective. The big house's spring flowed pure, while the quarters relied on hidden ingenuity, a dual reality that underscored the era's hypocrisies. Elias's resistance manifested in subtler forges. On the fringes, where oversight waned, he experimented with natural variants, layering river clay in dew collectors to yield drinkable moisture during dry spells, or advising on herbal infusions that echoed the filter's principles without machinery. These teachings spread through Josiah's network, embedding resilience in the soil itself. Irrigation furrows angled to avoid stagnation, crop rotations that mimicked purification cycles. It was a quiet reclamation, knowledge dispersed like seeds against the wind of erasure. Josie, now old enough to join the women's tasks, absorbed these lessons during rare visits, her questions evolving from childlike wonder to a budding awareness. "Why can't we tell the world it was yours, Uncle?" she asked once, her small hands mimicking the pour through invisible layers. Elias touched her shoulder gently, his voice steady. "The world hears what it wants, child, but the ground remembers." The betrayal's tendrils reached into the broader silences of history. Local elites, Hargrove's peers in county assemblies, adopted the device for their estates, masking it as communal progress while suppressing queries into its source. Lawyers in Savannah drafted contracts that buried origins in fine print, ensuring the narrative aligned with the paternalistic myths of benevolent mastery. Communities of the enslaved, scattered across neighboring plantations, exchanged tales in coded gatherings, ring shouts at hidden crossroads where the stolen stream became metaphor for all expropriated labors. Fear stifled open defiance, but persistence bloomed in oral chains, elders recounting Mira's salvation, the creek's whisper as a motif for unspoken truths, as summer's heat returned in 1855, bearing faint echoes of the prior year's plague. Elias watched from afar as a new trough was installed in the core fields, a sanctioned version of his design, branded and rationed. It saved a handful from fever, but the oversight was ironclad, Tate's patrols ensuring no deviations. The sight twisted Elias's resolve into something fiercer. He vowed silently to outlast the theft, his genius not extinguished but redirected into the unyielding fabric of survival. In the melancholia of those lengthening shadows, where memory warred with imposed forgetting, the story of the filter persisted, a current beneath the surface, carrying the weight of what was taken toward an eventual unveiling. The waters, once poisoned, now bore witness to a legacy deferred, its purity a promise against the tide of complicity. As the sweltering summer of 1856 returned to the Hargrove lands, carrying with it the faint, acrid memory of last year's fevers, Elias Crowe felt the noose of isolation tighten around his existence on the plantation's outer edges. The fields there were a forsaken stretch, where the red clay gave way to stubborn scrub, and the air hummed with the indifferent drone of cicadas. His reassignment had become a permanent exile, a calculated distancing that kept him from the creek's familiar banks and the communal pulse of the quarters. Days dissolved into a monotonous grind, clearing overgrown paths for new fences, hauling stones to shore up eroding banks, his body a vessel for labor that left no room for reflection. Yet in the quiet hours after dusk, when the overseer's lanterns faded into the horizon, Elias's mind turned inward, replaying the layers of his filter, the sand's gentle sift, the charcoal's unyielding grasp on impurity, like a mantra against the encroaching void. The community in the core quarters adapted to the shadow of the stolen design with a resilience forged in the fires of necessity. Old Ben, his once steady hands now trembling from age and overwork, passed the guardianship to younger kin, teaching them to replicate the core in miniature, hollowed gourds lined with river silt for personal use during harvest migrations. Lena's kitchen remained a sanctuary of subtle rebellion, where she infused broths with boiled filtered water, her portions stretched to nourish the weakest among them. The cholera's spectre had receded, but its lessons lingered in the pallid faces of survivors, a reminder that survival was not salvation, but a deferred reckoning. Josie, now a girl of 10 with Mira's determined gaze, wove Elias's story into her play, directing younger children in mock demonstrations by the rain puddles, pouring muddy water through leaf-layered funnels, their laughter a fragile defiance against the big house's looming eaves. Yet fear threaded through these moments. Tate's patrols had grown more invasive, his scar a jagged warning as he uprooted suspicious barrels or interrogated clusters at the wash lines, claiming searches for stolen tools. Whispers of the Invention's wider reach filtered back like smoke through cracks in the walls. Josiah, braving the trek to the fringes under cover of supply runs, brought news pieced from overheard conversations. The Hargrove purifier now graced the docks of Mobile, its scaled versions quenching the thirst of stevedores amid yellow fever's grip. "They call it a wonder from the south," Josiah relayed one humid evening, his brow furrowed as they crouched by a smouldering cook fire. "Saved a whole crew on a riverboat, but the coin builds ships for more of this." Elias listened without surprise. The betrayal, a dull ache long since numbed. He had birthed the device from the depths of loss, Mira's labored breaths, the children's hollow eyes, yet it now fortified the very trade routes that ferried human cargo to fresh hells. In response, he shared refinements born of his isolation, a way to bind charcoal with clay for longevity, or to angle collection troughs to capture dew without drawing water from tainted sources. These were gifts unpatented, disseminated through Josiah's trusted circle, embedding the knowledge deeper into the soil where overseers could not uproot it. Jeremiah Hargrove, ensconced in the expanding opulence of his estate, reaped the whirlwind of his opportunism with unyielding focus. The big house now boasted a new conservatory, its glass panes imported from the north, funded by royalties that swelled like the swollen creek after rains. His correspondence with Hawthorne had blossomed into a partnership of mutual elevation. The professor's latest missive, dated June 1856, detailed installations in Philadelphia's almshouses. where the device curbed a dysentery outbreak among the indigent. Your apparatus stands as a beacon of empirical progress, Hawthorne effused, enclosing testimonials from municipal officials blind to its shadowed genesis. Hargrove replied with enthusiasm tempered by caution, shipping refined prototypes, now encased in polished oak, their innards a perversion of Elias's crude ingenuity. He credited divine inspiration in public, but privately confided to brokers the device's edge. It sustains the workforce through plagues, ensuring yields unbroken. The irony escaped him. The filter, meant to purify the quarter's peril, now sustained the bondage economy, its success measured in bales of cotton rather than breath spared. The emotional fractures within the enslaved community deepened under this veiled prosperity. Families gathered in the praise houses with songs that layered sorrow over survival, their circles swaying to rhythms that evoked the filter's flow, rising, cleansing, falling into silence. Mira's kin, including Josie's mother, bore the heaviest burden, their grief compounded by the knowledge that Elias's isolation stemmed from their salvation. "He stands alone, so we might stand," she confided to Lena during a midnight weaving session, her fingers twisting thread into patterns that mimicked sediment traps. Resentment simmered in pockets. A young field hand, whose father had perished before the devices spread, eyed the hidden filters with bitterness, seeing them as harbingers of scrutiny rather than shields. Elias sensed these rifts through Josiah's reports, the isolation amplifying his guilt like echoes in an empty well. He longed for the communal fire pits, where stories once bound them, but duty anchored him, teaching Josiah to improvise with pine resin for binding, ensuring the legacy endured beyond his reach. Betrayal extended into the era's institutional veils, where elites like Hargrove colluded to bury origins. County records lauded the purifier as a Hargrove innovation, affidavits from complicit physicians attesting to its efficacy without probing the source. Lawyers in Atlanta drafted licenses that obscured labor's role, framing it as benevolent oversight. Northern academics, Hawthorne chief among them, integrated it into curricula as practical sanitation, lectures at Harvard halls drawing nods from future engineers, unaware of the fields where desperation had first clarified the murk. The enslaved bore the silence's weight, their oral traditions a counter-narrative. Tales of the Creek Unbound, shared at crossroads, where freedmen from neighboring estates traded warnings of similar appropriations. As autumn's golds bled into the landscape, Elias marked another year in exile, his body wearied but spirit unquenched. He rigged a dew trap from scavenged bark on the fringes, yielding enough pure water for his small crew, a microcosm of his original vision, untainted by patents. Josie slipped him a drawing during a rare convergence, childlike lines depicting the layers, labeled "For Uncle's Clear Stream." It pierced the armor of routine, a spark reminding him that memory outlasted metal. In the melancholy hush of those bordering wilds, where history's erasures loomed like gathering clouds, Elias Crow's ingenuity persisted not as a stolen artifact, but as a living current, whispered, adapted, waiting for the day when the waters would turn and wash the lies to light. If this story has already gripped you, leave a like. This helps Elias Crow's story reach more people. As the years blurred into a relentless tide on the Hargrove plantation, washing away the immediacy of the cholera's terror, but leaving behind the indelible stains of theft and silence, Elias Crow carried his exile like a shadow that lengthened with each passing season. By 1857, the fringes where he toiled had become a world unto itself, a ragged borderland of thorny thickets and half-forgotten furrows where the overseer's visits were sporadic, their indifference a double-edged mercy. Elias's hands, scarred from endless labor, now shaped subtler miracles. Dew pans fashioned from split palmetto leaves, capturing overnight moisture that trickled pure into hidden gourds, a faint echo of his original design. These small acts sustained not just his body, but the flicker of purpose within, a quiet insistence that ingenuity, once stolen, could not be fully extinguished. Yet isolation bred a profound melancholy, the nights filled with the distant calls of night birds that mimicked the lost murmurs of the creek, reminding him of Mira's fading voice, and the children spared only to inherit unseen burdens. In the heart of the quarters, the community's resilience wove the filter's legacy into the fabric of their endurance, a threadbare tapestry of whispered instructions and guarded relics. Old Ben, his eyesight dimming like embers under ash, entrusted the final refinements to Josie and her cousins, teaching them to etch the layering principle into memory through games and songs, where sand over black stone symbolized not just purification, but the sifting of truth from deception. Lena's influence extended beyond the kitchen, her herbal blends incorporating filtered essences that masked the device's presence, nourishing the frail during lean winters when rations soured. The cholera's grip had loosened, but its aftermath lingered in weakened frames and haunted gazes, families forever altered by graves that dotted the hillside like accusations against the indifferent sky. Josiah bridged the divide with perilous regularity, smuggling bits of charcoal or recounting the purifier's ironic triumphs, installations in Richmond's markets, where it shielded merchants from dysentery, its branded casings gleaming while the quarter's hidden versions rusted in secrecy. "They profit from your breath, Eli," he would say, his voice laced with a sorrow that mirrored Elias's own. "But we breathe still." The emotional weight pressed heaviest on those who remembered the invention's pure intent. Josie's mother, Mira's sister, confided in gathering circles her gnawing regret. The salvation that came at the cost of Elias's freedom, his genius now a spectre patrolling the edges of their world. Songs in the praise houses evolved into elegies, their swaying rhythms evoking the filter's flow, rising through peril, emerging cleansed, yet forever marked by the struggle. Resentment flickered in quieter moments, a young mother's murmur that the clear water brought clearer eyes upon us, her child born after the outbreak, a living reminder of risks taken. Elias felt these fractures through Josiah's relayed fragments, the isolation amplifying his solitude into a profound ache. He had forged the device from desperation's forge, for the aunt who withered by tainted troughs, for the kin whose cries pierced the humid nights. Yet it now circulated as a commodity, Hawthorne's lectures at Harvard halls, extolling its universal applicability to audiences oblivious to the chains that birthed it. In stolen reflections by his dew-traps, Elias pondered the betrayal's depth, not just Hargrove's opportunistic grasp, but the complicity of a system that erased labor's spark, turning innovation into inheritance for the unbound. Jeremiah Hargrove's empire, buoyed by the purifier's shadow prophets, expanded into a monument of masked cruelty. The big house swelled with additions, a library stocked with Hawthorne's treatises on sanitation, walls adorned with engravings of pristine urban fountains bearing his name. Correspondence flowed like the clarified streams he now peddled, partnerships with Baltimore engineers, exports to Caribbean ports where epidemics ravaged workforces much like his own. "The device embodies providential efficiency," he wrote to a Charleston investor in 1857, enclosing scaled diagrams that bore no trace of the creek's filth or Elias's calloused ingenuity. Tate, elevated to foreman with a stake in the royalties, enforced the plantation's dual reality with zealous cruelty, sanctioned filters for the fields to maintain yields, while unsanctioned ones earned swift correction, their discoverers vanishing into the barn's dim confines. Hargrove's piety rang hollower, his veranda sermons blending gratitude to the divine with veiled boasts of stewardship. the enslaved audience a captive congregation to their own exploitation. The silences of the era compounded this erasure, institutional veils drawn tight over the truth. Plantation ledgers attributed health gains to masterful oversight, medical journals citing Hargrove's pioneering adaptations without a whisper of origins. Elites in Georgia assemblies toasted the purifier as Southern ingenuity, lawyers sealing patents with affidavits that buried labor in legalese. Northern academics, Hawthorne foremost, wove it into the narrative of progress. His 1858 monograph crediting collaborative Southern insights, while footnotes alluded vaguely to folk practices. The enslaved community's oral chains preserved the countertale, crossroads gatherings where the Creek whisperer's story intertwined with broader laments of appropriated crafts, from blacksmith forges to herbal cures. Fear muted broader echoes, but persistence bloomed in the unyielding passage of knowledge, a subterranean current against the tide of forgetting. Emancipation's fractured dawn in 1865 offered Elias a tentative rupture from the fringes, his path northward a mosaic of safe houses and shadowed trails, Josie trailing years later to Atlanta's bustling rebirth. He lived out his days in quiet labor, mending tools for freed kin, sharing the filter's secrets in community wells that echoed his vision unclaimed. Hargrove's legacy crumbled with the old order. The big house a weathered shell, patents dissolving into obscurity. Hawthorne's heirs inherited acclaim, their archives sealed against scrutiny. Yet memory's persistence outlasted the graves. In the 1930s, WPA interviewers captured Josie's granddaughter's fierce recounting. Uncle Eli sifted life from death, and they stole the sieve for their glory. Dismissed as lore then, the fragments resurfaced in 2024, a university dig unearthing layered relics from the creek bed, carbon-dated to Elias's era, their design clashing with patented claims. Digitized Hawthorne journals revealed hesitant admissions, derived from an obscured laborer's contrivance. Descendants converged on the old fields, vigils under the gnarled oaks where red clay whispered of delayed justice. Elias Crow's genius, stolen but resilient, flows through history's undercurrents, a testament to the enslaved mind's unquenchable light, purifying the narrative of erasure one revelation at a time. In those melancholic hills, where forgetting once reigned, the waters run clear, carrying voices long silenced to the open sea. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the story of Elias Crow and the Hargrove Plantation. See you in the next video.